Hello and welcome back to the Countering Climate Skepticism podcast. This is the podcast where we continue to inconsistently release episodes weeks and months apart. Thanks for bearing with us on that. Life and technical difficulties have been getting in the way. On this podcast, we discuss and counter the arguments given by climate change skeptics and deniers. We explain the truth behind climate change and unpick the factual reality from the sensationalist climate skeptic arguments you might see on social media or in the news or spouted by recently elected politicians, possibly. We aim to help you challenge any climate denial arguments you might come across. My name is John Rainier, a history teacher, and I'm joined by my co-host Mark Prosser, a climate scientist who's recently finished his PhD. Apologies for the delay releasing an episode.
Yeah, apologies from me too. I guess we've had a lot going on. I've been to Japan for 3 months and that got in the way, as well as a lot of technical issues. So apologies, loyal listeners, but we're back now for a few episodes, hopefully. We think, John and I have, we were always planning with this podcast to do a certain number of episodes, and we're now coming to the end. So we're this episode here is the final one in the Ziggurat. We have a few more episodes planned, but we're probably not going to continue after that. So, and because it costs a little bit of money to host a podcast, what we're going to do is we're going to sort of move the episodes over to a YouTube channel at Countering Climate Skepticism. And we've already uploaded the 2-minute advert, and sort of in time we will get the other episodes up there. But just letting you know that if you want to point people to this resource in future, the podcast might not exist anymore, but it does exist in a YouTube channel setting. Yeah, and just in terms of like the final episodes that we're going to do. I mean, so there's been a lot of content delivered over these 7 Ziggurat levels, and we thought it'd be quite nice to sort of do an episode where we just do like a quick fire sort of revision of all the skeptic arguments, and then basically like a 1-line or 2-line response to them, so you can get sort of like a broad overview of some of the things we've talked about over the course of the podcast. So that's one episode that should be coming up in the next couple of months. But yeah, so that's where we're at, I think. Once again, apologies for the delay in putting out episodes. We're not very good podcast hosts in that sense.
You live and you learn. So, if anyone can remember back to our previous episode, which was level 6A of the Ziggurat, if technology can't solve the problem, then we shouldn't wreck the economy to save the planet. Well, today we're going to look at the alternative and in some ways similar argument. If technology can't fix the problems as they arise, why bother doing anything since we're all doomed? So today we're going to address what we mean by doomed, why it's not a particularly helpful way of looking at the problem, and how it suggests that the future is set in stone, which it isn't. We will also discuss how vested interests are influencing our beliefs about the feasibility of making changes to the environment, selling us on the idea that we are doomed, which is a way of convincing people to not change.
Yes. Cheery episode today, John. Cheery episode. Especially given the election of Donald Trump. Something we didn't see coming last time we recorded.
No.
Certainly not great news. The man who reportedly offered a room full of oil CEOs that he would kill both current and future climate legislation in the US if they put $1 billion into his campaign. Quoting from him, "You are all wealthy enough," he said, "that you should raise $1 billion to return me to the White House." At the dinner, he vowed to immediately reverse dozens of President Biden's environmental rules and policies and stop new ones from being enacted. So, not great. But on the subject of doom, I can understand if people get a bit gloomy about climate change. Goodness knows there is a lot to be gloomy about. But I have a problem with the word doomed, John. Doomed. I mean, I personally would never use such a word to describe the situation we're in. Not because I'm a hopeless optimist, heaven knows I'm not, but because doom to me sounds like the future is written in stone or something. And if you look at the temperature projections using climate models out to the year 2100, they don't show that. They don't show that things are sort of going off the chart. We've got a graph here which we'll put in the show notes, or the link to that. What do you see on this graph, John?
Yeah, so this graph, Mark, shows the global surface temperature from 1850 through till the present day, and then continues up to 2100, showing the possible outcomes of what could happen for global temperature changes. And it shows that there's a huge range of possible outcomes, best case scenarios, worst case scenarios. Best case, global warming by 2100 only rises by 1.5 degrees from 1850 kind of temperatures, and then worst case scenario that it's nudging on like 4.8 as a potential increase. So it just shows that there's a huge amount still to play for of what could happen with temperature rises.
Exactly. Yes. So if people who are saying that the situation is doomed, what you'd expect in the climate projections to show is that it's going all the way up to there'd be just one line. There wouldn't be like this variety of outcomes. It's not like, the scientists are trying to, give us reason for hope. It's just like we don't know what the future is going to be like. There is still uncertainty, and depending on that uncertainty, we could have a better case or a worse case. So we just don't know. So it's kind of wrong to sort of say we know what's going to happen. We're doomed. So the scientific best guess is that there is still a range of outcomes, all of the way from moderately bad to truly awful. And I don't know about you, John, but moderately bad sounds far better than truly awful. And worth making an effort for. The future of climate change is still uncertain, depending on how much effort we make from now, how fast new technologies end up catching on, a process already well underway, and whether or not we get lucky with climate sensitivity. So just to explain climate sensitivity, will the Earth warm by just 2 degrees if we double atmospheric CO2? Or will it warm by 4 degrees? That's a big open scientific question. So we could get lucky with that. We could be unlucky with that. It's in the lap of the gods a little bit. But yeah, that's also part of the reason we don't know what the temperature will be like in 2100. But so depending on all those things, we might still be able to avoid many of the nasty impacts of that severe climate change might throw at us. Now, if governments, companies, individuals collectively all decide we're doomed and stuff their heads in the sand like a bunch of ostriches, then yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if things then went to hell in a hand cart basket, whatever that expression is. If things went to the worst end of the projections. So if we're actually doomed, sure, go stick your head in the sand. But fortunately for us, that's not been foretold. However, acting like we are may increase the likelihood of a worse outcome if it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So yeah, doomerism isn't a very good idea. But yeah, the word doomed, I think, warrants a bit of a closer investigation. What does climate doom actually mean? What comes to mind for you, John?
The idea we're all fucked, so we might as well let the world burn. I'm being a bit facetious. To me, I think it has two sides to it. I think the climate skeptics might see it as global warming is going to happen anyway, or the change needed is impossible, so we might as well just carry on what we're doing. There's no point changing anything. But I think there's maybe another side to it as well, which is the climate doom that can be experienced by people who believe that we should do something, which is the idea that changing behaviours starts to feel impossible when faced with the mounting resistance from all of those who are not just unwilling to change, but also actively are pushing in the opposite direction.
Yes, and there certainly are plenty of those. But I mean, I guess it's just worth remembering that we, with all the action that we have done to date, we're already on a better path than we would have been anyway. So it's not like we have no impact at all. So, but yeah, like there is a lot. There are reasons to feel not so cheery, but yeah, Anyway, so I mean, like, in terms of, I just think this word doom is very ambiguous, and I'm not entirely sure what it means. And so, like, if I'm asked, what is climate doom, I would say that if you want to ramp up the concern level all the way to 11, the worst scenario I have ever heard of is a situation known as runaway greenhouse effect, where the world becomes sufficiently warm for enough of the ocean to evaporate. And remember, water vapor itself is a powerful greenhouse gas, thereby tipping the Earth into a feedback state where more evaporation of the ocean begets even more evaporation, until a lot of the oceans evaporate away. Such a state of affairs may have occurred on Venus in the distant past, and currently surface temperatures there are hot enough to melt lead. This is partly to do with its atmosphere that is almost entirely greenhouse gases. Needless to say, if such a process did happen here on Earth, it would make our planet uninhabitable, and we would indeed be utterly doomed. Yeah. However, in some rare good news, John, no one in the scientific community is seriously worried about this happening. So if we dial it back a notch from 11 on the scale of climate doom, we have another phenomenon called runaway climate change, where we push temperatures to a point where emissions from non-human related sources, so natural emissions, become the self-sustaining driving force for even more global warming. Here, temperatures rise out of our control, but not to the point of boiling off the oceans. The document below, link in the show notes, suggests that if we warm the climate by 5 degrees or more, this becomes a risk. If we did manage to raise the temperatures by 5 degrees, you could also probably justifiably use the D word, the doomed word.
Okay. All right.
But are we looking like we're going to push the temperatures to beyond 5 degrees, John?
No, I don't think so. I've heard that there's a degree of consensus amongst the scientific community now that we've already moved beyond the 1.5 degrees of warming, but we're still a long, long way from 5.
Exactly correct. Yes. Yeah, and it's unfortunately that we're probably going to be unable to stay within 1.5 degrees. And also it's worth bearing in mind that it's not like 3 degrees is like 50% worse than 2 degrees and 4 degrees is 50% worse than 3 degrees. I was trying to, in my mind, get a rough idea of like how much worse 3 degrees is than 2 degrees, and I sort of initially thought, is 3 degrees warmer 10 times worse than 2 degrees? And then I was like thinking, no, maybe that's probably too high. So I tried in my mind 2 times worse, and I thought maybe that's too little. So I ended up settling on 3 times worse. Yeah. So essentially, if you go from 2 degrees to 3 degrees, that's 3 times worse. To 4 degrees, maybe like 9 times worse than 2 degrees.
Right.
5 degrees, maybe 27 times worse.
Right.
So 5 degrees is really a huge, huge step from 2 degrees. So it's not like, linearly getting a little bit worse. So we're way off 5 degrees.
It's almost like the ball starts really rolling. It starts snowballing.
Yeah. If we keep on moving temperatures up, it will be pretty bad. But I guess the point that I'm making here is that we are a long, long way off 5 degrees. And so it's even if we get to 4 degrees, it's going to be plenty bad. There's still a huge difference.
Yeah.
So not unless we fuck things up spectacularly, getting to 5 degrees. At the moment, with the pledges we have already committed to, global temperatures may rise by 3 degrees by the end of this century.
Okay.
If we do any more than what we have already promised, then maybe it can end up somewhere between 2 and 3 degrees. But 5 degrees, I think it's probably safe to say that humanity is probably going to avoid both runaway climate change as well as a runaway greenhouse effect. So those absolutely doomist scenarios that I talked about above, I would be very surprised if they happened, given what we've already done and what we know about the future, even with its uncertainty. Yeah, there's a nice Kurzgesagt video that talks about this, and put a link in the show notes. Now, admittedly, even with those two top doom scenarios ruled out, things can still get pretty bad. Previously, we did an episode, episode 9, the third level of the Ziggurat. The title was, but the impacts will be minimal. In this episode, we talked about the impacts we are likely to see at 1 degrees of global warming, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, 4 degrees, 5, and more than 5. Here on Earth, we're already having trouble at plus 1.2 degrees. See, for example, the absurd amount of flooding taking place seemingly everywhere over the past year. And we are trying to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees. But this now looks a little bit difficult given where we're at. We probably will exceed 1.5 degrees. Global climate change at 2 degrees will be unpleasant. 3 degrees may not collapse human society, but it will be pretty nasty. And starting from now all the way to the end of the century, every 0.1 degree increase will be worse than the one that came before it.
Yeah.
I.e., it won't be linear. So with this challenge laid out in front of us, do we A, stick our heads in the sand and do nothing, or B, continue to fight to reduce the eventual temperature rise?
Yeah, it's interesting when you put it that way because, yeah, like if you take the approach of we're all doomed, then it is only going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Whereas if you take the approach that we're not all doomed, and if we start doing stuff now, then the future looks increasingly bright. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So I think it's very clear that we still have everything to play for, and it just makes no sense to drop into a doomist hole. You know, even though like you do get bad climate news, you know, at the moment certainly. But yeah, it's important to remember, like, you know, things add up, and we have been making moves to decarbonize the energy system, which is a huge thing. It's not easy. Like, no one said this problem was easy.
Yeah.
You know, even without like vested interests and whatnot, it's not straightforward to completely change our modus operandus. You know, we you know, before we knew fossil fuels were causing a lot of problems, they were great. You know, they give us loads of energy, you know, and we basically built our whole society around them, and now we have to change that. So it's just not easy as a problem to start with. But so we have made a lot of progress. Just need to keep going, you know, Trump notwithstanding.
So yeah, I think we do need to continue the fight, and especially for those countries as well that are least to blame, but most seriously hit by the consequences of climate change. So in the recent COP29 meeting, there were representatives for the Alliance of Small Island States, known as AOSIS, I believe. They walked out of the meeting due to insufficient funding commitments. So experts have predicted that $1.3 trillion would be needed to support the catastrophic consequences that are going to affect those countries. And there's a real sense that everyone is struggling at the moment, and therefore that seems like a ridiculous amount of money to be putting forward to help other countries. But we really need to be coming up with a solution that's going to benefit all, because for these countries, you know, that's pretty desperate if they're feeling they need to walk out of a meeting because it's not even close to touching what they need in order to survive. You know, even in developed countries like the UK, a quarter of all children now live in poverty. So we really need to find solutions worldwide that are going to benefit everybody, not just the few, continuing as things are, because clearly whatever we're doing at the moment, it's not really working for anyone.
Yes, yeah, like it is a global problem, and we're going to need to fix it, you know, like together. So yeah, and good luck to us in our effort to do that. You know, when we'll have to see how it all pans out. But yeah, it'd be absolute folly to just give up. I really like anyone who comes to me and I'm sympathetic when people are discouraged, but it's just I just don't think it warrants it personally. Yeah. And what's more, the effort that we have made up until now has paid off. Had we done nothing from the beginning, a +4 degree world in 2100 could well have been on the cards. Now this is far less likely. Incidentally, some people might think that there's some temperature threshold that if we pass, shit suddenly hits the fan. There is no doom temperature threshold like this per se, but there are multiple smaller, what are known as tipping points in the climate system. For example, if you drive the global temperatures too high, the Amazon rainforest may hit a point where it might die back inexorably. Or the AMOC current in the Atlantic that keeps us in Europe warmer than we would otherwise been might experience a profound and irreversible change. However, unfortunately, we cannot say with precision at what temperature thresholds these individual tipping points are likely to happen. However, sometimes we do have a rough idea of the ranges. So, for instance, there's a tipping point for the total and irreversible melting of the Greenland ice cap. So Greenland's, if Greenland melts, I think it's 6 meters will get added on to global sea level rise. Ooh. And I mean, it won't happen immediately, but it'll happen, over time, I don't know quite how long, might even be centuries type of speed, but even like that will be very inconvenient for a lot of coastline, and a lot of humanity lives on the coastline. So, but we think that the threshold for that irreversible melting will take place between plus 2.5 and 3 degrees. So basically, if we manage to stop the temperature rise before that, it will remain in perpetuity or like for millions of years or whatever into the future, and it won't be a problem. But if we go over this threshold wherever it is, and it exists somewhere, we don't know exactly, then it's just going to melt. We can't, whatever we do, we're not going to be able to stop it. It might take a long time, but so that's a tipping point that once we go over, we can't go back. Yeah. We're sort of like locked into that. So since we're to a certain extent fumbling in the dark as the temperatures go up, all the more reason to fight to reduce the eventual temperature rise by every 0.1 degree that we can, to reduce the likelihood of accidentally setting off one or several of these tipping points. But to emphasize, there is no temperature threshold, for example 4.1 degrees, where the Earth's surface switches from not on fire to on fire. That's not science. You can put at ease the minds of anyone who actually thinks this, and some people do. People think have got this very simplistic idea of what's going to happen. It's a continuum of bad things continually get worse. Continuing to get worse. A scale of shit. Yes, exactly. A shit scale, if you will. And even if hypothetically we did have a crystal ball that told us, and we don't, that things are going to get really bad, does it make sense to give up? I would still say emphatically no. If we knew the climate was going to warm by a catastrophic 4 degrees or something, I would still rather this happened later in 2120 rather than 2080. Basically, even if we couldn't stop it, I think there's value in slowing it. Yeah. But I repeat, we don't know what the future holds, and our best guesses from climate modelling suggest that 4 degrees is now unlikely. So given that we have everything to play for, what are all these claims of doom really about then?
So you might ask yourself why such a statement of why bother doing anything since we're all doomed can be considered climate change denialism at all. I mean, it's very different from the previous claims we've looked at, like climate change is natural or climate change won't be significant, where we've been looking very, very closely at the science. So going back to the beginning of the series, we argued that any argument about climate change which serves as an excuse not to take action could be seen as a form of climate denial. And so it is with the doom argument. Even though it seems on the surface to acknowledge the problem, it is still a form of climate denial.
Yeah, totally. Now, we're not really pointing the finger here at anyone who's feeling a bit despondent at the state of climate change and our response to it. Who we are pointing the finger at is fossil fuel interests who are promoting doom as a strategy to slow the energy transition. Let me explain. As the impact of climate change have gotten worse and become more visible for all to see, the fossil fuel industry, who are behind a lot of the climate change denial, have been steadily losing the more basic arguments about climate change. People now largely believe it is happening, that it is because of us and fossil fuel burning, and that it is bad. So how are they to hinder efforts to move to a greener future now? By depressing people, since depressed people don't apply any political pressure to their government or the companies they buy their products from. Therefore, from a fossil fuel interest standpoint, weaponized hopelessness is a key strategy. So mechanistically, how do fossil fuel interests convince someone that dealing with climate change is a lost cause? This is where arguments like 6A of the Ziggurat, if technology can't fix the problem, we shouldn't wreck the economy to save the planet, come in. By acknowledging that the problem is real, but that the solutions are too expensive or have fatal flaws, for example, electric cars are worse for the environment, what they seem to be saying, without saying so explicitly, is that the situation is bad, yes, but we don't have any solutions that are viable. Therefore, we are doomed. So the doomed bit is implied rather than said out loud. It's cynical, and the number of doom denial comments in comment sections to various climate change YouTube videos in recent years have been increasing, according to Simon Clarke, who has a video on climate doomism. And it's a very good video, so I'll put a link in the show notes there. And we're not doomed. All the efforts we have made so far has amounted to something substantial and has taken us off a path to 4 degrees and onto a path to 3 degrees. A very worthy achievement in its own right. We just need to keep going.
Yeah, you've mentioned before about the merchants of doubt working in the smoking industry, and these same people are now working in the fossil fuel industry, trying to kind of sow this uncertainty about the future and doubt for the science, so that it kind of protects their vested interests. And there's quite clear evidence of people's fears being exploited, and the doubt about the reliability and trustworthiness of experts that actually just harms us all. It's the power of the status quo fighting to protect the short-term private interests of companies like the fossil fuel industry at the expense of everyone else's long-term interests. The video you mentioned talks about the problems with the media being funded through advertising, which leads to a situation where media needs to align its messages with where the money is, meaning that what people are hearing is coming through a filter. And that might go some way towards explaining why recent surveys have suggested that millennials and Generation Z people are actually less optimistic about climate change and the future, and are succumbing to climate doom, maybe due to the media that they're consuming.
Yes, yeah. I mean, like, I'm not very au fait with, how the sort of Generation Z gets its media through TikTok and everything. But I mean, yeah, I'm not particularly sure that that's the best way to get your news about climate change, when it's all sort of algorithmically filtered. And yeah, I'm not an expert there, but go on. Sorry.
I think with the way media is consumed now, and I am speaking anecdotally, and I think it would be a very difficult thing to actually build up the evidence to prove it. But what you consume has an influence on how you think, and the way we consume news now, of it just being drip fed and channeled to us and personalized, means that I do think people's views of the world are being very heavily influenced by what they're immediately seeing around them. People aren't tuning in and seeing mainstream news stories. They're getting whatever their understanding about the world in a very bitty fashion through whatever's funneled to them. And I think that we are therefore seeing that people's viewpoints are being very much influenced by that, but in a much more subtle way that's harder to quantify.
Yeah, and you think this is sort of linking to people becoming more despondent about climate change through... Yeah, could be.
I mean, the whole bent of clickbait and everything like that is trigger something in somebody, make people feel an emotion, normally a negative one of anger or frustration or what the fuck's that all about kind of thing, and negativity that unfortunately is what gets things read. And so negative news gets read a lot more than positive news.
Yeah, that's certainly true. It actually reminded me of there was I don't know how many years ago, but an author published a book called The Uninhabitable Earth, and he had a really, really despondent view about the climate future. He thought we were doomed. And what was interesting is seeing how the climate scientists responded to that book. And I initially and when I saw the sort of the headlines, I was quite drawn to it. All right, this person seems very confident, and he speaks like he knows what he's talking about, and he does make a compelling case. But then when you sort of looked at what sort of climate change at the forefront of the field and sort of temperature predictions were saying, they were just scathing of what he was saying.
Right,
okay. And that's even from someone who was doing a climate change degree at the time. But yeah, certainly it's very, people know that like those sort of headlines are catchy. Like we are going to be living on a barren earth, or something like that. It just like naturally sort of intrigues us or something. Yes. We stop what we're doing and we read the article.
Dystopian future. We can all imagine ourselves living in one.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's the same thing that attracts people to like horror films or something like that. But yeah, unfortunately, I think people have cottoned on to the fact that maybe that gets articles read and things clicked on. So yeah, but doesn't mean that it's accurate content. Unfortunately, the future may be quite boring in terms of it's not going to be terribly awful or terribly good. It's going to be somewhere in the shitty middle, which is maybe not good for clicking articles and whatnot.
The future is mildly shit. Yeah.
Well, I wish it was going to be just mildly shit, but yeah.
Hopefully, the future is just mildly shit.
You should start writing articles online, John. I can see the links being clicked on as we speak. Never let anyone tell you the situation is doomed, because it isn't, and cynical ulterior motives may be at play rather than hard-nosed objective skepticism of renewable technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I strongly recommend you do go and watch that Simon Clarke video, because it really does lay it out really well. And, absolutely, I don't know about you, Mark, but I find that it's quite an uphill struggle sometimes trying to kind of combat the relentless negativity. You feel like wanting to give up and waiting for the world to go to shit and then going, see, I told you this would happen. But that's actually what climate skeptics want. They want those trying to push for change to believe it's impossible, but it's not inevitable unless we give up too.
Yes, certainly. And also, like, I guess, there's the whole state of the world, and then there's the climate problem, and these things are connected, but they're also separate issues. So, like, the world, on this podcast, I guess we're focusing mainly on the climate issue. So, like one's despondency about the general state of the world may make one think that the climate situation is also very despondent, but they are different issues, although they are related. So anyway, yeah, that's my laboured point there. So I think that's basically the episode. Do we have any climate good news story, John? Apart from the fact that we're now no longer on a 4-degree, cataclysmic path, and only on a 3-degree path now?
Yeah, I mean, if the idea of the future only just being mildly shit isn't a good enough climate good news story for everyone, I've also got this one here about air pollution in England. So since 2003, air pollution in the UK has halved, according to new research from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the IFS. So this study shows the significant progress in reducing the fine particulate matter of PM 2.5, which is known to damage health. And what's also interesting as well, because the sharp decline in air pollution due to COVID-19 has actually led to lasting improvements. So it's not a case that things just shot back to right where they were before or worse. That pollution levels remain much lower than pre-pandemic levels, which is really promising. And this study even breaks things down by different ethnic minority communities as well, which has shown a substantial benefit for those as well, and that the exposure to these particles has the gaps narrowed between ethnic minorities and white populations. So as well as it decreasing everywhere, that the gap has narrowed as well to just 13%, from 13% in 2003 to 6% in 2023. So everyone is benefiting as well. So this is likely due to reduced pollution in urban centres like London and the Midlands, where many ethnic minority communities reside. So for any of those listeners, and I know there's a few people I know in my life who absolutely rage about clean air zones and everything like that, well, they are having a significant impact in the air that people are breathing. So it is worth continuing. So, however, because what would a climate good news story be without a however? 96% of England's population remains exposed to air pollution levels exceeding the World Health Organization's recommended limit. So we've just got to keep going. We have halved it. We need to keep going. So clean air zones in the cities, reduced steel production seems to be making a big difference. We've just got to keep pushing in this trajectory.
Yeah, so you see, John, we can, have an environmental problem and then sort of work to improve it. It's not, it's not like we're sort of toddlers incapable of like sorting out some of the problems that we create for ourselves.
Yeah.
And also I was thinking like in the future, if there's a sort of we electrify transport and, we're in a future where like most of the cars are electric on the road, the sort of the amount of air pollution will continue to decrease because you don't get that from electric vehicles. So yeah, that's a sort of a link with the climate change there. So yeah, so that's good. And I mean, like, I think in India at the moment, the air pollution levels are truly off the scale awful.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like thankful to God that I don't have to breathe in the sort of, the atmosphere that they have in Delhi or whatever. Yeah. So in the next episode, we will discuss a listener question from Aaron, who asks about the responsibility of individual countries, where when Germany, for example, argues that they needn't do anything because they are only responsible for 2% of global emissions. How should one counter that? If you have any other burning questions, now is the time to email us, because like we said at the beginning, there will be a few more episodes and then that will probably be it in terms of new episodes. So please let us know ASAP and we may get round to doing episodes on them. But speak now or forever hold your peace is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. You can find a link to all of the materials we've referenced in the show notes. If you want to know more about the Countering Climate Skepticism podcast, check out our website at ccspod.podbean.com. If you've enjoyed the episode and would like to support the show further, you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to send us feedback or suggestions for denial, skepticism, or contrarian arguments, or ideas for guests, or connect with us on social media, feel free. It's goodbye from me, John Rainier.
And before I say goodbye, just a second reminder that we are moving our content to YouTube, so keep an eye out for us there. But also from me, goodbye and have a lovely week till we meet again.
And we leave you with this quote from Jana Stanfield: "I cannot do all the good the world needs, but the world needs all the good I can do."